So I would like to thank Michael and the august panelists with whom I have the pleasure of presenting today. I'm delighted to be in such company, especially because I've known Michael for over 20 years. I've had the occasion to work with him on publisher education and free expression advocacy projects in the former Soviet bloc, to work with him on electronic publishing and history and journals publishing, on producing video, online videos especially, to promote book publishing in the hard and social sciences. Reflecting on this actually boggles the mind, and back in 1991 when it all started, both of us found ourselves speaking to publishers and booksellers in Prague, not with the great Michael Shatskin here, but with his parents, Leonard and Eleanor, true visionaries who really would have loved this conversation as well. So looking back is wonderful, and generations back are great, but if you really want to know the answer to this question, which Michael framed, what?
This question is media publishing.
Yeah, this question, that question. Does the media matter? We probably need to go not back in time to our parents, but forward. You should ask not me, but my oldest daughter, who is 17 and soon to be matriculating at the University of Michigan, or my two boys who go to prep school at on Rose Hill in the Bronx. Ethics. This is a great question. We need to talk about the questions that we should be publishing and producing about. I think the big questions include, why don't we riot during economic crises? For the sake of rioting, perhaps? For the sake of justice? Why don't we seek accountability when we invade a former ally and kill hundreds of thousands of people and hide from looking at our own war dead? How has our system of education gotten so skewed? Where has our Second Amendment gone? And what's up with the tax structure? These and other questions like these are the big ethical questions. And the substance of what they are about and the processes of publishing and production in 2014, when you address them, are, I think, intimately related. First, though, let me say a word about what's propelled me here and about my work, however it may be relevant to these questions and our big questions. Google invested in my little company, Intelligent Television, in New York 2 years ago to create new content for YouTube, and specifically to build something called the Intelligent Channel. Intelligent Television produces that content, conversations about the issues that I've raised are featured on that channel on YouTube. But we also produce documentaries for public television and various online platforms. I am a Russianist by training and family and linguistic and probably political orientation. This is a famous painting of Russians by my favorite Russian painter, getting ready to publish something, it looks like. We are producing some sales conference. We are producing a lot of documentaries, one about Harlem, one about education, one about the history of American foreign policy, but my favorite films are films about Russia. We've just finished a film that screened this weekend at WNET in New York City about Russia and free expression under Putin. And last month we began principal photography on a new and ambitious film about the Bolshoi. This is a still from that production shot at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. I also work at Columbia Center for New Media Teaching and Learning, and I'm a producer of something at Columbia that soon is going to be called Columbia Online. Columbia's online educational presence centered on our 40-person strong Center for New Media Teaching and Learning in the university's Butler Library. Today specifically we're producing MOOCs, massive open online courses of all kinds, from virology to banking, again to my favorite history. This one with, that's Columbia's Center's logo and website. This one with Eric Foner on the Civil War, the legendary professor Eric Foner, who will soon be retiring and who's teaching his Civil War and Reconstruction class for the last time, will be a big deal when it launches on the allegedly non-profit edX MOOC platform this fall. In short, we are publishing video in the library. Publishing video in the library, which is kind of insane, but there it is. All this background to one side, the thing I'm involved in, the business I'm in, the business I would submit we are all in, is the attention business. And if we speak of human-to-human interaction or technology-to-human interaction, we're all collaborating or competing with one another here, essentially for 4 holes in the human head. This is Da Vinci. I couldn't find it. Come on. But this is Da Vinci. The 2 here in the center are, our eyes, and the 2 here at the bottom of our ears. So they're tiny. If we're 5 feet, 6 feet tall, whatever, these are like specks by comparison. But the inputs I'm going to drone on today about the people, the pages, the speakers, the screens, get processed in waves and beams that come into these little apertures. And if you get the signals right into these tiny targets, as we have seen over the centuries, from Martin Luther to Martin Luther King, you can change the world. So if we think of ourselves all, publishers, producers, journalists, academics, activists, students, future publishers, my condolences, today is all in the same business, the attention business, we will have an easier time processing the answer to that big question that I'm trying to make today, which is grosso modo no. We're all doing the same thing. So let me make 3 points. Video is becoming more important, prevalent. It's the most important, in effect, by a variety of different measures. Communications medium in the developed world, which is amazing after only about a century of its development, since the Lumiere brothers and Edison and all that. In the United States, each of us engages in, on average, 4 hours and 31 minutes of TV viewing a day. Plus, we also engage in 5 hours and 16 minutes more of viewing on one kind of device or tablet or another. So if you add 4 hours and 31 plus 5 hours and 6, that's like almost half the day on a screen of one kind or another. And next year, according to Cisco, which is a rather substantial vested economic interest in this issue, some 15 billion network computers, phones, and other devices are going to be in operation around the globe. 11 billion square feet of screens are going to be in operation worldwide. I mean, these are kind of unfathomable numbers, I guess. Video will exceed, according to Cisco, 91% of all global consumer traffic on the internet. And the quantity of data, to speak of data, that we are dealing with here will be like far greater than terabytes or petabytes. Cisco is calling it the zettabyte era. Netflix accounts for over 1/3 of America's internet traffic every evening after dinner these days. And it was Netflix's president and founder, Reed Hastings, who first coined this term, the attention business. The primary competition for Netflix, he has said, is not ABC or NBC or HBO or AMC theaters, but everything. We compete very broadly, this is a quote, for a share of members' time and spending, he said, against linear networks, DVDs, and other internet networks, video games, web browsing, magazine reading, video piracy, and much more. Over the coming years, most of these forms of entertainment will improve. Consumers will choose and consume, he said, from more and multiple options. We are, he announced, in the attention business. And again, echoing what Professor Greco said earlier, would put to you that the business we're all in now, especially with digital publications and initiatives that compete for this rectangle, these rectangles, and these 4 holes, is the attention business, which again says something critically important about our focus and the way we have to mobilize. If our competition is not, another academic online journal essay or whatever, but Facebook, or Katy Perry, or Roku, the latest John Green book, or the latest video game from Activision. Now, the technology of what several of the people here today build and study with that technology, we may all be building what Google's former CEO, Eric Schmidt, famously to the TV industry a few years ago, called the perfect channel. I love this concept of creating the perfect channel because theoretically I was supposed to be creating some kind of channel, and it's not really the perfect channel, but I like the idea of the ambition. The perfect channel is where mobile, local, and social data come together and provide each viewer, each reader with what she wants, when she wants it, and how she wants it. The quote from Schmidt is this: "Online, through a combination of algorithms and editorial nudges, suggestions could be individually crafted to suit your interests and needs. The more you watch and share, the more chances the system has to learn, and the better its predictions get. Taken to the ultimate, it would be like the perfect TV channel. Always exciting, always relevant, sometimes serendipitous, always worth your time." It is in part to understand how to build such a channel, such a force, not just a search engine, but a delivery engine. Google is in this business. Fueled by advertiser dollars, that YouTube has invested sums in creating new YouTube channels and partnerships such as what we've been doing with our little company in New York. And if we in the attention business need to understand anything, I would say, any one thing, it is to understand where Google is going. Google, as Daniel Soares has written, is learning. So is everyone else, but Google is the model. The more data it gathers, as he writes, the more it knows, and the better it gets at what it does. So I hope that the Intelligent Channel, or Columbia Online, or anything that any of us, you build, could become, the perfect channel. But note the sources of information in this presentation so far: Cisco, Google, Netflix. These are companies and forces that really control, with Comcast, AT&T, some others, our entire digital landscape. And that's the second commonality we all have as free thinkers, to be acutely aware, self-aware in this political context. If we're trying to affect any change whatsoever, and now I should turn to Russian and speak in Russian, but if we're trying to affect any change whatsoever, that, the first point in the ethics and publishing conversation, know who owns the ball field, and who rules the roost. The second point is that education is also becoming video-centric. And education, to me, that's where I sort of do most of my work now. When I was a student at Cornell in the early 1980s, you could walk up to campus and find in the library materials, media, books you could find in Richard Pollenberg's class, or Walter Lefebvre's class, or Theodore Lowy's class, media that would trump what you had access to in my slumlord's apartment on DeWitt Place in Ithaca. And the situation has now been turned completely on its head. So the environment that like my three children enter into in high school classrooms are like Shinto temples or isolation tanks compared to what they have access to at home, or on the bus, or even in Central Park. Teachers are trying to catch up, and companies in the so-called learning management system business or LMS business like Blackboard, Sakai, Kaltura are slowly integrating media into the educational environment. But what's happening is that universities are adopting video again, adopting the screen as a delivery vehicle. MOOCs, Columbia MOOCs, which I produce for Coursera and, and edX, new platforms like World Science U, Brian Greene's amazing new platform, the scientist. These are becoming sort of new and interesting publishing projects. We're actually creating a MOOC, a film, a documentary about a MOOC and the MOOC business called MOOC the Movie. And we started shooting it At the University of Pennsylvania, Phil Reese teaches this extraordinary online class on modern American poetry. And this is what it looks like when he sets things up to begin his lecture. This is just a few minutes. 4 microphones, 15 screens. This is the classroom that he's teaching American poetry out of.
So Julia's going to be, I think, at the end. No? That's good. That's a good spot. Right, yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see it. Yeah. All right. Can you guys kill the music for me for a second? Yes, absolutely.
That's our director of photography.
Here, I'm yours.
Who's a crabby personality. But there it is. I mean, there's a lot of lenses and wires and speakers in that room. This is Eric Foner's class, a sneak peek of, an edited thing that we've put together. Foner, legendary biographer of Lincoln, Pulitzer Prize, National Book of Bancroft, etc. He appears in various documentaries.
And as you all know, Hollywood has gotten into the act lately. In the last few years, many of you might have seen
3 different camera angles.
like The Conspirator by Robert Redford, or of
Edited
course Steven
material.
Spielberg's imaginary portrayal of Lincoln, or my personal favorite, Abraham Lincoln the Vampire Hunter, which actually I do recommend as an exciting and not all that bad movie. It's not historically accurate, but neither are the other ones, so what difference does that make? And Lincoln is linked to all sorts of prominent figures in American history. Here's one of my favorite Lincoln images. This is Marilyn Monroe holding up a portrait of Lincoln. She was actually, she read a lot of books about Lincoln. She was an admirer of Lincoln. I actually wanted this to be the cover of my book on Lincoln, but the publisher would not agree for some reason. And then there are, I believe it's true to say that there are only 2 figures in American history who you can make a living impersonating. One is Elvis Presley, and one is Abraham Lincoln. And there are guys who go around, and that's their living. They go around opening shopping centers and things dressed as Lincoln. So here's one of them with me at a conference. It's kind of like, he's not quite tall enough, this one impersonator, but Lincoln was 6'4". He was sort of like Mayor de Blasio, but I have a little collection of, I have a big collection of Lincoln stuff, but I brought a couple along just to show you. One is an article, I don't know if anyone's ever been in Springfield, Illinois, where Lincoln was living as a mature person, where they have this new presidential library museum, and this article in the New York Times about it, it's very high tech, very modern. It starts with a stage presentation, Ghosts of the Library, in which a historian emerges on the set to talk about the library. A quill pen lifts into midair just by itself and writes the Gettysburg Address in midair. And there's all sorts of other things. And then at the part I didn't like, at the very end, the historian turns into a ghost himself and disappears into thin air. The historian was actually a hologram. I don't approve of historians disappearing into thin air, so...
He's hysterical, and he's got a New York City shtick. But he's hysterical, and he's... but he learned... he went to Columbia. He went to Columbia as an undergraduate, took his PhD there, studied under James Patrick Shenton, who went to Columbia from New York, took his PhD there, who did a course on WNET, sort of television, online education in the 1970s, a 76-hour course called The Birth of the American Nation. And Shenton studied, took his PhD at Columbia under another guy whose name I don't have in my notes, but who I could tell you, who taught Russian literature, because it all comes back to Russian literature. And that teacher had a radio program in which he discussed Dostoevsky, and Shenton, as a little boy in New York City, an Irish kid in New York City, was listening to this and said, oh my gosh, if I can learn at Columbia University in the 1930s from some... So, you know, there is a tradition here about education and screens and speakers and stuff, but it's an interesting flip that we're involved in, because 100 years ago or 50 years ago, if we were publishing Eric Foner's lectures, we'd publish a book. We'd publish a book of his lectures, and it would be great. And now we're publishing a video, and not just a video, but a video that is highly produced. And in the MOOC world, as you will see, if you sign on to edX or Coursera or wherever you might want to do some online education, there's a veritable arms race in terms of quality, and people are ratcheting it up day by day. It is intense and fantastic as far as I'm concerned in my business. So video is becoming ever more influential as an information and education tool. I'd like to ask, and you know, glide into the closing bit of my presentation here, how we should structure our teaching and learning, and media and production and publishing institutions, our funding and finance mechanisms to sort of better accommodate it. Is there anything that we can teach it, that we publishers, because I'm a former publisher, as I tried to hide in my biography, but I had a publishing company once. Is there anything we can teach it? Is there anything we can learn from it in publishing? And can we work with it to publish and publish well books, articles, video, content, mixed media, whatever we call it, that matters. What can we teach it? I would submit that we can teach it annotation and citation. Video is behind. Video is 100 years old. The stuff we're doing is 500 years old or whatever. And give it the benefit of those 400, 500 years. The credits on a video or film roll at the end. You will notice that the next time you're in a movie theater, or you know, if you're watching on TV and you're lucky enough to see the credits because they shrink. Those of us who make video don't especially like. But soon you will be able to have those credits like endnotes move to footnotes. You will be able to have those credits on the screen with the video. And soon, very soon, you'll be able to click through. They'll be clickable, throughable, or whatever. Indeed, I'm running a team at our center that is writing a guide, the equivalent of the Chicago Manual of Style, but for video production and publishing for Columbia University Press. And you can see some of the, oops, oh yeah, let's see.
I'm Richard Pena. I'm a professor of film studies here at Columbia University. The film language glossary came about because at a certain point, I'm not sure how many years ago, I became aware of the fact that people were teaching films all over the campus. I mean, beyond even, say, language departments, where a number of courses had sprung up in sort of, you know, French or East Asian or different language departments. People were also beginning to include films in history courses and political science courses, anthropology courses, and along with that, sometimes students were being asked to criticize or to talk about films, and often didn't have the vocabulary to do that. So professors were being called upon to give basic courses, really, in sort of film analysis. So a few times I received requests, or could you please recommend a basic textbook on films so that my students can learn how to actually discuss films? And that always seemed difficult, or in a certain way non-productive. So at a certain moment I thought maybe we could just come up with something that people could consult readily online that they could then, you know, use to help write them their papers. So from that eventually sprung the idea of putting a film glossary online, which we would then be able to illustrate with actual examples, and from that seed the idea grew. I I think the film language glossary that exists now is reasonably complete, fairly basic, but it has a certain completeness to it. It could always be expanded and improved, obviously, but I think we've got the basics down. Recently, I was on the phone with somebody from Armenia who told me that they make use at a center where this person works of the film language glossary there because
That's
one of the
bookshelf,
activities
by the
there
way.
is
If you're in
teaching
the
basic film courses, and they
department,
find
that's
the
what your
glossary
bookshelf
very
looks
useful.
like.
I was really flattered and delighted to find out that all the way in Yerevan, Armenia, they're making use of our film language glossary. Obviously, we can expand to other areas. There are other
This is what I wanted
terms,
to
other
show.
ideas that we could include to expand the palette a bit. I myself would also love to include on it analyses of individual films. Some of that might run into the problem of clips and rights and whatever, but for example, I teach every fall a class called Senior Seminar in Film Studies, in which we always choose one film and spend the entire semester analyzing it. And my students do extremely detailed analyses of that film. I usually just break it down into parts, and people do shot-by-shot analysis of the film. For example, this last semester we did Jean-Luc Godard's Weekend, and we had some really excellent analyses of the film that really went very, very deep into that. You know, there should be a future version of the film language glossary where these are eventually simply put online. We have a whole series of these analyses that people can refer to both as models or for real information about classic films. For me, the very wonderful thing is that something that I think when I was an undergraduate who loved film and felt film was far and away the most important thing that happened in the 20th century, and now suddenly here I am in the 21st, kind of getting, seeing that my wishes come true and that everybody wants a piece of the action when it comes to film, and that literally every professor in almost every discipline in the humanities and social sciences wants to include film somewhere. That's both great, you know, in that we see the way in which film has become accepted in the academy. On the other hand, you want to make sure that as part of that acceptance, it's being well and seriously taught, and that people do understand basic concepts and terminology and things like that. So, you know, for me, the film language glossary is less for students of film studies, who I think are getting much of that material in their basic courses, than for the fellow travelers, those people who are learning history and want to see Grapes of Wrath, but want to understand something about deep focus and what role deep focus plays and how it's an important component for understanding how he creates his thoughts about the Great Depression and things like that, that it's more than just the pretty pictures that Greg Toland sets up, but it actually has an important part of the overall message of the film. In a certain way, it's trying to bring some of that cinematic analysis into the historical analysis that that particular student might be using.
So the point here is that you can see annotation going on. The point here is that you can see annotation going on in the film language glossary, and pretty soon it'll be possible to underline a film. You know, in the same way that you underline a book. It'll be possible to click through a source in a documentary. So if you're watching, you know, a film on the documentary on the civil rights movement, and there are photographs that are being panned across, you can actually click through and find those photographs from the very visual, audiovisual medium that you're watching, or find out what the song is, and maybe even acquire it. So that's kind of a revolution, I think, and that's something that our film cousins, or I'm a film cousin, I guess, or you're a cousin, I don't know, so our family can teach each other a little bit about. And finally, you know, I think what video needs to do, what our side of the family needs to do a little bit more of, is to assemble a kind of advisory board or Sanhedrin of the kind that was called by Ford and MacArthur in the 1960s and 1970s to determine the future not of television or public television as it was then being called, but the future of the web and the screens that we're all publishing on. Because in addition to what I say, you know, here about the good news and the growth of video and the growth of good business, you know, there's bad news, which is that the stuff that's produced for a lot of money is essentially the stuff that's feeding us as a country is essentially horrible and full of lies. And another fact that's true is that the philanthropies we hear about, all the time on public television, are no longer leaders in the field of communications and media. A paper that I wrote together with my colleague Mary Albin, whom I have been working with for these many years, indicates that all of the foundation funding that went into public media in like 2012 or 11, whatever the latest year was that we cited, was less than the amount of money that goes into one Hollywood blockbuster. So, if we care about issues like the kind I mentioned at the beginning, if you care about, future on any level, we have to figure out how to get more money into this process. That kind of money, I think lies with Google and Apple and Netflix. And how do we separate them from it? More money was brought into documentary filmmaking through Kickstarter in 2013 than from the MacArthur Foundation. That's weird to think about, but it's also kind of interesting because it sounds like a lot of people care about it. So that is, the end of all I have to say, and thank you. I will take some questions, yeah.
Any questions for Peter?
Yes.
You want to say the whole thing again in Russian?
Don't do that to them. Yes.
Peter, the thing you showed us was about vocabulary for digital humanities.
Yes.
Is there going to be a different vocabulary for people who want to teach in the sciences or the social sciences? Are you working on that?
Yes. And the reason that video is that slide is called Digital Humanities is because we assembled a bunch of people in the so-called digital humanities at Columbia, from Princeton, MIT, and others at the start of May. And it's a weird concept to be calling it the digital humanities. You don't call it the digital sciences, right? I mean, you haven't done it, it's been the digital in the sciences forever, or whatever. It just went direct. So it's a weird thing, and I hope that, we put parentheses around digital, but I think that there needs to be a great deal more work in framing a lot of these technical issues for science and the humanities. Trouble.
Peter, my question is, what is the progress of the notion of chunking films and identifying with metadata the subparts of the film that you might be interested in, so that we could get to the equivalent of deep linking to the part of a movie that is the thing you're searching for? It seems like a massive task.
Yeah.
I know it's stymied print publishers thinking about trying to do that within books.
Yeah.
And I wonder how you're dealing with it in the cinema business.
I think that, ironically, for all that I've said, the intelligence community is leading a lot of this work. And at the same time, there are folks like the Internet Archive. Rick Prelinger at the Internet Archive has been calling for this kind of, sample databases to be created. And the most extraordinary one that's been done to date is perhaps the most important. It's called the 9/11 database at the Internet Archive. And if you do nothing else the rest of this week, go see the 9/11 archive at the Internet Archive, because they've taken video from hundreds of sources of the day of 9/11, and they've chunked it up, and they've made it cross-searchable across language, across time, so you can see what was playing at noon in New York City time across the world on German television, on some Arabic stations, on Russian television, you name it. But it's just beginning. Now, it may be good that it's just beginning because film is like still in its early, like the long view or whatever, you know, so maybe it's early enough that we won't have 500 years going back to deal with. We'll have just 100 years, and everything else will have baked into the production process some automated way of chunking and applying metadata for place, for time, for other things related to the, but not enough is being done yet, I think.
Other questions?
Could you talk a little bit about the rights situation in relation to Foner's course? Who owns the rights to that? Is that Foner? Is it Columbia? Is it some other entity?
Gotta run. No, that's all being sorted out right now. As universities get into the publishing of audiovisual material in deeper ways, they're looking at their traditions with respect to the publishing of written material, but they're also recognizing that there's much more investment that goes in, if the university is funding this kind of thing, than went into original print publishing. So it's a tricky situation. edX, for whom we're producing this three-part course on the Civil War and Reconstruction, is a non-profit organization. Coursera, which is another MOOC provider, is a for-profit, venture-funded organization that has, for example, Russian venture capital in it. Now, I know from Russian venture capital, and Russian venture capital and university educational missions don't necessarily find too much common ground. So it remains to be seen. The answer to your question is, insufficient, I guess, but it remains to be seen. I will say that I believe that more work needs to be produced and funded so that it can be licensed openly, and that it can be, used with some safeguards, but to, integrate into other. The whole business, I remember when I started in publishing, the permissions business at St. Martin's Press was, remarkable. And you have to call up St. Martin's Press to get a quote of a poem from our American canon. Like, what's that about? Like, should anyone be able to see a piece of Eric Foner teaching the history of the Civil War? It's a tricky situation, but somewhere deep in my heart, I think the answer to that is yes.
So let's thank Peter.